Thank you for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to do this presentation on evolution of a hero. And there's a couple of, I think, very valuable stories of history that can help give us precise examples of people that have been heroes. This kind of information can be very useful for you as storytellers, for writers, for anyone of the creative arts. When we can go ahead and have examples of characters in history that can then be used in our own stories as their examples, their motivations, the actions that they perform to achieve a certain goal, their victories, those are what make great stories. There were 4 things I see as being contributors to evolution of a hero. Motive a motive as a person or as a shared group, responding to a problem, building upon your strengths and resources, and influencing others. An example of a person that was tempted. King Louis of the 12th was kidnapped, imprisoned, and removed from his throne. His son was taken to a community far away, and they subjected that boy to every vile, anything that could corrupt him as a young lad. Lewd women, rich foods that could make you lust for more flavors and more food. Swearing, vulgar language, all kinds of vulgar language. Lying, cheating, everything they could do to corrupt this boy. And they subjected him for 6 months. And after those 6 months, he kept resisting. And they asked him, why are you resisting all these temptations? You've got anything you want. Why are you resisting? And he said, because I was born to be a king. He saw and knew his potential and had to act the part. Another part of an example of a hero being a hero because of what kind of guy he was. Lord of the Rings. There'll be a couple references to the documentaries called Lord of the Rings. And there's the story about Frodo, of where he says that he's seen a whole bunch of people fighting over where to take the ring. And he says, I will take it. I will take the ring to Mordor, but I don't know the way. 9 people stood up and offered to help him in his goal. But he was the first person that took the step and says, I will take it. And everyone else says, we will support you. Another example is that other people can go ahead and see examples of people's potential and integrity. George Washington in 1755 was Lieutenant George Washington in the British Army. During that time, he served under General Braddock. They went to a fort to go ahead and take possession of the fort. A couple of miles from the fort, 2,000 men were ambushed by 900 French and Indians, because it was the French and Indian War. Arrows, guns, bam, bam, bam! Hours and hours of the battle, and within the first 2 hours, half of the 2,000 were killed. Soon there was only one officer riding his horse around the battlefield. The other officers were either severely wounded or killed. And this one Lieutenant George Washington went around, showed courage. Bullet, phew, his hat. A bullet, phew, his jacket. A horse shot down, down. He gets off the horse, runs across the field, gets on another horse, gets up, and continues the battle. And finally, they have to retreat in defeat. 15 years later, Washington, still being a part of the British Army, is given a new assignment. Go to Ohio and divide up lots of land to give to the veterans of the French and Indian War. While he's on his way, an Indian trader stops and says, I have a great war chief that wants to meet George Washington. Why? We don't know. He simply wants to meet with him. They meet in a council around the fire. I have a translator for that Indian chief. And the Indian says, I have great influence from the great rivers and lakes to the far blue mountains. And I am old and soon shall be gathered to the great council fires of my fathers in the land of shades. But ere I go, something bid me to speak in the law of prophecy. He then begins to speak of George Washington. Listen, the Great Spirit shall protect that man and guide his destinies. He shall become a great chief of nations, and a people yet unborn shall hail him as the founder of a mighty empire. We may wonder, how can a guy become a leader of nations? But those of us that know history of the United States history know that before the United States became the United States, there were the 13 colonies. Each of them considered themselves a separate nation. And when George Washington took command in his second military career of the colonial army and all 13 colonies, he became a chief of nations. And then he became something, president of something, oh yes, the United States of America, that became the founder of a mighty empire. Other people saw what Washington was going to be. He didn't see it, but other people did. In 1891, another story, Chicago, completely built of wood, a fire starts. 1/3 of the city burns within 30 hours, and the only reason that it stopped burning, there was no more fuel. There was once 300,000 people there. All those buildings burnt down, particularly the business district. 1/3 of the population were homeless almost overnight. The only thing that survived was the train roads and the cattle areas and 2 granaries. There was a guy that would live there, and his name was Henry Greenbaum. He sent letters to international banks throughout the world and says, please invest in Chicago. Now is the time not to give up, but to buy in. When Chicago was restructured, it was not from wood, but from steel. Chicago was once the 25th biggest country in the United States. It's now the 2nd largest city in the United States. And it now houses over 1 million people. Because people believed in the city, the people, and Henry encouraged people to invest in Chicago. And I never realized that Chicago was in the middle of the country where there's all these railroads and entries, and it was such a vital spot that all those investors prospered from making an investment in the small city and now big city of Chicago. Many heroes have traits that they're known for. And think about who you admire. I admire a guy by the name of Bill Boardman. He's a storyteller. He's a Toastmaster. He's had 3 separate careers, and he's an inquisitive fellow. He's always learning, but he gained 3 different careers because he wanted to learn something new. He told a story about him holding a heart in his hand. And now he's currently working in church temples. And he's a busy guy, but he's an inquisitive guy. And I admire him for that. My question for you, and you won't be given too much time, so you can just go ahead and write these down because I'm too mean to give you too much time. And I also want to let you stay over too late. Questions for you guys. I made it big in print so I could see it. What traits does the person you admire have as a leader? Those traits may be represented by a theme song. Have to do this. Because how many times do you have music? Come on, everybody, rock it. Okay, so think, what is their theme song? But even better, what is your theme song? Think of a song that you love. Do you love it because you can relate to it? Do you love the song because of the words behind it? What does your favorite song say about you? And I'll let you reflect upon that because I can use the pun.